Welcome back, my adoring fans. For once, we're actually not going to be checking out new item changes and are going to be taking a look at some bosses that got buffed in the 1.4.4 update, the Brain of Cthulhu and Golem. Now, I know that there are a bunch of bosses that got large buffs and nerfs in the update, and you may be thinking to yourself, bro, these two bosses have nothing to do with each other, why are they in the same video? And yeah, on surface level, they don't have anything to do with each other. But upon further inspection, you may pick up one factor that actually does link these two. And that factor is that throughout Terraria history, these two are the most trashed upon bosses that the game has ever seen. At least that's the impression I've been given over the years, because they had atrocious boss fights with mechanics that were extremely easy to abuse. I don't know which of this duo has been slandered more, but in my own mind, they've basically been reduced to the two free boss fights. The Brain of Cthulhu is like those day-old donuts my local bakery used to sell for 25 cents, and Golem is a 3 for the price of 1 deal at the dollar store. And the things I'm comparing them to aren't actually free, but you get what I mean. And this is all because these bosses really were that easy, as long as you went about fighting them in any competent manner. In the 1.4.4 update, along with oodles of new changes to weapons, items, and game mechanics, has also come large buffs which attempt to give this pair of beasts more brute strength and fix up some of their abusable characteristics, which I'll be going over with you in this video, starting with Mr. Big Brain himself. The first stage of the boss fight, where the boss itself is not able to be attacked and it surrounds itself with creepers, was completely untouched, which I think is fair since that part of the fight can actually be rather annoying if you aren't equipped with the right items, while the second stage, where you actually fight the body of the boss, was altered in a number of ways, starting with a 250 base health buff, which may not sound like a lot, but considering that the Brain of Cthulhu only had 1000 health to begin with, ends up making this a rather large 25% boost to its durability. This is the only boss in the game that can take knockback, and the amount that it takes was reduced in the new update by 5% in all difficulties, making it slightly harder to keep away from you. The illusions of itself that the boss creates as it gets lower on health now become opaque much faster. Something being opaque meaning that you can't see through it. If you didn't know what that meant exactly, I actually had to look it up because I'm dumb. There's a safe range around the player that prevents the Brain of Cthulhu from teleporting directly onto the player now, which is a good change. Unavoidable damage is generally bad boss design, even if it's unintentional, which I would assume this mechanic was. And finally, one of the most important adjustments in my opinion, the boss no longer has a map icon in stage 2. If you weren't aware, this is basically what made at least the second stage of this fight completely free. The entire point of the Brain of Cthulhu is that it's a rather low health enemy, but as it gets lower on health, it's meant to be more tricky and harder to hit the boss, as it moves and teleports faster, and the illusions at low HP are meant to make it basically impossible to tell which of the 4 images you see are actually the real hitbox. And you're supposed to guess and get the final attacks on the boss through luck, or in another fashion that I'm going to be showing you. But ever since Expert Mode was released, you were able to use your minimap and just see exactly where the boss was located after it teleported. So you would just be able to completely bypass the illusion mechanic, and it just turned into a sad, frail little brain that you could never miss and would just delete immediately. Now, the brain in its second form is still quite frail, though as said before, relatively much less so, and these changes are actually massive for the difficulty of the fight, at least on paper. In practice, I don't believe that it's all that much more difficult of a fight, but it has some new dynamics that I've found while testing out the boss that I think are pretty cool, and can most certainly end in a failed boss fight if not played around correctly, especially depending on the weapon you're using. The first phase goes as usual in all of the fights, and isn't that hard to deal with because in all of the class types I have weapons that pierce. I didn't realize you could do this with the spear, by the way, but if you just sit like this and attack the creepers, they can never hit you, and you can just kill all of them. It's kind of stupid. The second phase, though, as expected, is significantly harder than it was before, and significantly more interesting, because while I chalked the original idea of the Brain of Cthulhu's fakes of itself as a mechanic meant to end the fight by lucky hits, that's not actually how it functions, at least depending on how you go about dealing with it. The very last part of the fight ends up being a part that relies on directional adaptation, which is vague, but is just what I'm going to call this thing that I did to avoid hits while fishing for damage on the boss, which is basically by using attacks on the fakes in order to figure out where it's safe to run. With the spear, I would try attacking the two images on the top or bottom, and if neither of them were the real boss, I would move in that direction to make sure I didn't get hit while attacking the other two illusions to try and get some damage. Obviously, I didn't do this perfectly, but it's the idea that I was trying during the fight. With the magic setup that I had, I did something else that I found cool, which was that in the second phase, I used the Crimson Cloud as a sort of alert system, leaving it on the left side of my character so that its damaging rain would be falling through both of the illusions that appeared on that side, while I would focus my Thunder Zapper on the images to the right, the cloud basically acting like an alarm system, which I think makes it one of the best items in general in this fight now, and will immediately find the brain so that you can attack it or eliminate two fakes and create a safe way for you to run while attacking the other side. I'm talking a lot about something that honestly might be kind of minor and was definitely a way to fight the boss that has always existed, but I just really love that not only was an abusable mechanic with the boss fixed in the changes, but it has also now highlighted this really cool way to fight the boss. The mini shark is the easiest single weapon to use to fight the second phase, by the way. The fast fire rate makes it really hard for the boss to even hit you, and you find it immediately almost every time. And I know I used a super potion here, okay? And just maybe I would have died if I had used a normal one instead, but I still stand by my previous mini shark statement. Now that we've dealt with that, we'll move on to Golem. If all the hard mode bosses were a litter of kittens, Golem would be the runt of the bunch. And that's saying something, because the Destroyer is also pretty goddamn runty. But that's just due to what I call worm boss syndrome, which he can't do anything about. And while you could probably defeat the Destroyer with a pre-hard mode weapon if you really wanted to, I still feel like Golem was a more free boss fight, and was actually just a pile of janky movement and attack patterns and an unfortunate mechanic that really just made it so that the only way you ever died to him was through unlucky and blundered projectile hits, which aren't even the main attacks that the boss is supposed to embody. Not all of these attributes were changed in the new update, but the most important one, the problematic mechanic, was. Golem was given some normal stat buffs, being extremely large increases to the health of his head, body, and fists, which, like, wow, those are big numbers. This is significant both because it means the fight lasts longer, which makes any boss fight more dangerous, and another mechanic that this boss has is that the projectiles that it fires will start firing faster as its health goes down, meaning that with these buffs, you now have to deal with projectiles firing faster for longer at all stages of the fight, because Golem now takes significantly more damage. The next change is that the boss now charges its punches with a visual effect for half a second before firing them, which is something needed to eliminate some BS factor that could have come from the next change, which is that Golem's fists can no longer be deflected. It also now takes up more enemy slots, which reduces or eliminates enemy spawns, but that's not important. This is what we gotta focus on. This stupid thing was finally changed. Well, I can't say for sure this is necessarily a game changer for Golem. This is something that's needed to happen for a long time, because since the beginning, during fights with this boss, its body was basically always frozen. It could jump around and still had projectiles, but this big ass punch that was basically Golem's thing was essentially not even an attack it could utilize, because when getting hit by anything, the fists would just retract back to him, and you just never had to worry about them whatsoever. So now this boss is way more bulky than before, making him more difficult to burst down, and a previously useless attack is actually now potentially dangerous, and is a factor you have to be keeping track of during the fight. Though, like the Brain of Cthulhu, this is all on paper. There's nothing crazy to go over about Golem's changes in comparison to the Brain of Cthulhu when talking about the fights. It's, as expected, just a longer and more testing battle. You definitely have to watch out for his fists now, as they do like 100 damage, and this isn't something that I really have to worry about because I always make sure to take care of them first. But if Golem still has his fists in his second form, you really have to watch out, as they start punching really fast. If both of his fists are intact in second form, now that they're unstoppable, I can see him dumpstering just about anybody in this fight. But as long as you're dutiful and destroy them during the first stage, then you won't have to worry about the fists much. They're just another projectile that you need to watch out for now, essentially. While the health buffs are a little boring, they most certainly make Golem a lot more dangerous, and multiple of the fights I had against him were quite close just because he was able to last a lot longer than before. I expected the Terra Blade specifically to shred him, since it's the perfect kind of weapon to deal with multi-segmented bosses, but he held up much better than I figured, and almost killed me in that fight. So, pleasantly surprised. This thing is fucking nuts, by the way, and Golem didn't hold up well against it at all. I haven't gotten around to testing the flamethrowers yet, but like I mentioned in the last video, something about them will be coming soon. I actually love this weapon. It feels insane. But that's going to be just about it. That is the 2 dumpster fires of Terraria Reborn. Neither of these bosses are insanely strong now that they've been changed, but I love that they were finally tweaked in a way that actually made them feel like complete bosses, if you know what I mean. And I think that the Brain of Cthulhu especially now actually has a really cool identity. Great to see that these 2 may have finally found a place among their brethren. That's going to be all for this one though. It was a little late. Work has been hectic and my energy has been low. It's quite hard to find the time to work on these videos without completely burning myself out every workday, so I end up having to wait for my days off to have more time to get these done. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.